You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Well, happy Friday evening, folks. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. It's been kind of a weird week. Was it this week where I had Rocky on the show, then I was gone on Monday, and then I was gone last night? It was a rough week over here, by the way, just work-related stuff, and I was slammed, absolutely slammed out of my gourd. But we're here tonight live. This is the Intrepid radio program, as I've already said, and as you already know if you're tuning in. But if you don't know that, we're right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. And you can join the simulcast of this show in video over on my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. The best reason to go over there is to join the live chat room during this show. You can listen to the audio over on Odyssey Radio, and you can come on over and join the chat room. And if you want, you can mute the video and listen to Odyssey however you want to handle it. But join the Intrepid family over there on my channel at YouTube and contribute to the conversation or just read the posts. It's a great little sounding board and a great way to meet some good people. So thank you for tuning in tonight. The last time I talked on the radio was a couple of days ago. I believe it was either Tuesday or I don't know what day of the week it was, but with all the stuff going on over here. But I was talking about humor and sense of humor. And the reason I did that was, I think it was Monday that Rocky and I did a live show together on this channel, and Rocky and I tend to get a little raucous, a little raunchy, a little edgy over on his show, the Situation Room, where we do politics and we do world events and all of that stuff, but we temper that by pulling back from that a bit and trying to offer up humor, reasons for you guys to laugh, something to listen to when you're on your computer and enjoy life a little bit more and maybe learn a couple of things along the way that we've got tucked into all the humor. But some people don't like humor. Some people are against the kinds of humor we do. And so I thought it would be good to tackle the topic of humor. And that's why I did that one other night this week, whatever night that was, folks. You can figure that one out. Because, like I say, it's been a roller coastery week over here. And so tonight I want to pick up that topic because there's still a couple of things that are valuable to know about the way we understand humor, the way we hear humor, the way we react to it, all of those things. And there's nuances of humor that we need to really understand. It's good for Rocky and I, in doing humor and doing edgy humor like we do, to understand how people react to humor. And so understanding humor is really understanding the psychology of humor. Now, did you ever think of it that way, that everything we do with our brains, our minds, that we react to, that we engage in, all has to do with the psychology, the psyche, our personal psyche, the psychology of the mind, the science of the brain, how things work, and then, of course, the psychological, emotional side that says, why is something funny to one person not funny to another person? Why is humor that's too or a little too soon to tell that joke? You've heard people say that. Why is that offensive to some people, yet gives us this dark it appeals to a darker sense of humor that's in all of us. Go, that's really inappropriate, but it's kind of funny. We've all done that to a certain degree. And, not all of us plug into the same mold. There's obviously people who think differently than that. But in general, human beings have senses of humor and opinions about what they hear in senses of humor, what they hear in comedy, how they react to it, dependent on a lot of different psychological factors. And so I want to talk about the nuance of comedy tonight. And think of this and get as comic as you want over in the chat room if you're there. And think about this as we talk about comedy and sense of humor and why it exists and why, even in the midst of a national/international pandemic, international makes it pandemic, a national epidemic, an international pandemic, where we're on lockdown, we're short of money, the government's trying to do their best to make things better. That's their job. And so why can we find humor at a time like this? Are we to walk around gray and sullen? By the way, walking around by ourselves because we're all self-isolating to a certain degree. And we've got a degree of belief in that being an answer to the problem. You've got people that will self-isolate and self-quarantine. Preppers are probably really good at this. But then you also have people who are away on the other end and say, I don't need to do any of that. I think it's all a hoax. Or I think it's fake. Or I think I don't need to take it as seriously. I'll be okay. And so with all of that going on, why is it important to have sense of humor? Don't you think humor helps relieve stress? And I've got some stuff over here I want to talk about a little later if we get there, about the 5 ways that humor reduces our stress and our anxiety. But first I want to talk about this nuance of humor. And while it's said on average that children laugh 300 times a day and adults only laugh 5 times a day, that's a striking difference, isn't it? We have to ask ourselves, how is this natural phenomenon developed? How is it sculpted? Since children laugh more than adults, does our sense of humor dwindle as we become more aware and educated of the world around us? And if adults are laughing less than children, is laughing and the art of humor a process we unlearn? Or is laughing merely immature? And when we become mature, we don't need laughter anymore, as some people will say. And although many psychologists discredit the scientific importance of studying humor, and that's a topic that seems awfully trivial today, believe it or not, the global recognition and cognitive complexity of laughter and humor may, in fact, make it one of the most important topics to investigate, to research, to study, and learn a little bit about, especially in psychology. So with I was going to say psychologically, and then psychology came into my mind, so I started saying 2 words at once. With a psychology approach, this article that we're talking about is going to break down what is humor, explore the different types of humor, and humor theories. Is it going to consider how humor affects our daily lives? So all of these things that we're talking about, and that we talked about the other day, are things that I think are important to explore, to find out, number one, when is humor appropriate? What are the nuances that we put to it? What is the good of humor? And is there a psychological base to humor that we can hail to? So the first question, we dealt with this a little bit last time, is what exactly is humor? Where does it come from? And with expanded investigation of the development and the cognitive psychology of humor, that's a mouthful, isn't it, for just talking about what's funny to us, the most fundamental question remains the most difficult to explain, and that is, what exactly is humor? We could ask the same question about love. On a psychological, on a brain chemical, what's love? What causes us to love somebody? We can talk about things around love that make us want to love a person, but what is love really on a psychological level? And so it's a great question. What is humor? While the quotidian usage of it might be associated with the ability to be amusing or be amused by something, scientifically, what are the thresholds of humor? To A, make something funny in the first place, and B, make something funny before it becomes vulgar. Which, you know how Rocky and I have done humor in the situation. Well, many of you do. And we sometimes play good cop, bad cop. And the one person will introduce some kind of humor that is this shy of vulgar. Maybe some of you would think it is vulgar. Different takes on it. And the other guy will say, I can't believe you're saying that on radio. Why would you want to talk about that? Like the time where Rocky stopped the whole conversation several months back and asked me, so Scotty, have you ever had sex with a ghost? And I'm like, what? What are you talking about? And, of course, there's a big hit out there on the radio. So it all depends on when does something funny become vulgar? And so without any central definition of humor that might be out there in the world of psychology, there was a University of Western Ontario professor, Rod Martin. He was prompted to write a unifying book that investigated the role of humor in psychology. And in doing so, he defined it as this. Listen to this. A process that can be divided into 4 essential components. 1, social context. Means where's it happening? 2, a cognitive perceptual process. 3, an emotional process. And 4, the vocal behavioral expression of laughter. Those are the 4 things that define humor on a psychological level. And so, although a definition is yet to be established amongst psychology researchers over the past decade, Martin's definition has played an important role in identifying specific components that are necessary for humor. And now maybe you just go, I just laugh. I don't need to hear any of that BS about psychology about it. Well, maybe so. You laugh at what's funny and you don't laugh at what you'd find not funny. But there is a psychology to it that's important to understand. Now, while there are discrepancies between researchers on the specific makeup of humor, what comprises humor, most psychologists can agree that coupled with social dynamics and subtle verbal phrasing are the prevailing ingredients of what makes something funny. Meaning, what is subtle verbal phrasing? Think about it, break that. It's subtle verbal phrasing. It's the way things are said, delivery, timing, wittiness, and so on. So there's an origin of humor, and while the perception of humor is instinctive to most of us, where and why and was it developed, as compulsive as it seems, the cognitive complexity of humor requires several skills to make it work. Language, intellect, awareness of correct social content, an ability to limit it when you need to, and abstract thinking. So more importantly, this reflexive behavior, it's similar to other behavioral reflexes with biological basis. In other words, startled response. Thus, this complexity suggests that there is some form of genetic writing. It's encoded in us, folks. People say we have systemic racism because it's encoded in our DNA, which I disagree with. I think racism needs to be learned. But humor is encoded within us. It's part of our genetic makeup. It's responsible for this, and it makes it similar to other fixed action patterns. Fixed action patterns. Things that are ingrained in us on a DNA level. A distinguished former professor at the University of Michigan, Richard Alexander, was one of the first researchers to analyze humor. And he did this from an evolutionary perspective, and way back in 1986. We're talking 34 years ago. And extending from a proposed theory, which was Hobbes' superiority theory, Alexander proposed that reproductive success came from an individual's ability to use humor to advance social standing and ostracizing others. By using ostracism, it ultimately affected the access to resources and therefore survival. Get that? Reproducing of the species was closely pinned with the way you could exhibit humor. And so Alexander's evolutionary theory proposes that by using humor, it advances social status or mate selection enhancement. And it decreases the social status of other individuals. That increases desirability amongst potential mates and initiates social unity. While the origins of humor are a main focus of research, the proposed idea of evolutionary adaptiveness is a prevailing theory underlying the origin of humor amongst modern research. And so, when you think about that, think about the things that make you laugh about the people who are your mates, your partners. Think about when you first met them. Think about the things that you have done in social settings that involve humor that hopefully will attract another person to you. Perhaps somebody you're interested in. And the use of humor is an evolutionary piece of DNA in us that helps us land a mate, in other words. So there's a great importance to humor, I think. And it goes beyond the whole mating thing, evolutionary. Although laughter and humor can coincide with each other, laughter is an important subsidiary component of humor. The overlapping words are closely related, noting that laughter is the result of experiencing a humorous cognitive activity or other external stimuli. You know, that's a scientific, psychological way of saying when you find something funny and all the elements are together, they make you laugh. And while laughter can be thought of as a critical outcome of humor, not all humorous situations produce laughter. Although the psychology of humor is increasing a focus on laughter itself. A prominent feature of laughter is the universal nonverbal language that it forms. Laughing, ha 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 ha, is just nothing but guttural sounds. There's not real language there. The language is in the sound itself, not the word, not the linguistic of it. So even though laughter is an offshoot of humor, the nonverbal language of laughter proposes a reason for the global recognition and usage of humor across various cultures, demographics, age groups. So, and by the way, you notice that the jokes of somebody who's 80 years old are very different than the jokes of somebody who's 20 years old. Those things vary. Look at that sometime. You may have probably light years ahead of me. You've noticed that. When your grandpa tells a joke, you go, oh, that's a grandpa joke. Versus when a kid who's anywhere from 18 to 24 tells a joke, you can see the difference from grandpa's joke. So while these close-knit words are integral parts of one another, it's important to establish their precise relationship to one another and the important position laughter plays in humor. And while the significance has been growing in the field of psychology over the past decades, it also bestows social, psychological, physical benefits. It attracts attention. It causes admiration. It softens criticism. It breaks down anger. It delineates social boundaries. It alleviates conflict between people of different backgrounds. It's also an important phenomenon because it becomes more refined and developed. with development. Humor becomes more sophisticated. It also plays a specific and significant role in developmental psychology, cognitive psychology. And in adults who lack the ability to appreciate or create humor, deficiencies are thought to be signals for autism, Asperger's syndrome, and even schizophrenia. So in children, the ability to develop a sense of humor serves as a marker as to whether or not symbolism and abstract thinking are being developed in that child. While the importance of it once seemed trivial, the ability to develop and comprehend humor are incredibly critical marks of health and normal development. Catch that? When you watch your kids, and if you got older kids who've grown up, how did they develop their senses of humor? Senses of humor are critical hallmarks of good mental health and normal development. And there's this past versus present shifting views of humor that are out there too. At the base of three theories that exist today, historical figures such as Kant, Plato, Aristotle, Hobbes, and Freud underlie the framework for the prominent theories that are still used today to define humor. And while each distinguished historical figure contributed to each theory, Freud distinctly broke down humor into six aspects. Say that fast 3 times. Specifically focusing on aspects that surround humorous events. Now, these are Freud's 6 aspects of what develops humor. 1. The most favorable condition of the production of comic pleasure is a generally cheerful mood in which one is inclined to laugh. So, you got to have a good mood. You got to be in a good mood, a cheerful mood. 2. Thank you, Freud. 2. A similarly favorable effect is produced by an expectation of the comic, by 2 being attuned to comic pleasure. Got to be tuned in to being pleasured by comic relief. That's like sitting in your chair with a pipe or a cigar, in Freud's case, and saying, I am in a cheerful mood. Now pleasure me with your comic routine. It sounds a little stiff, but you get where he's going. Number 3 is unfavorable conditions for the comic arise from the kind of mental activity with which a particular person is occupied at the moment. 4, the opportunity for the release of comic pleasure disappears too if the attention is focused precisely on the comparison from which the comic may emerge. This does sound like a doctor or a psychologist watching a comic, doesn't it? 5, the comic is greatly interfered with if the situation from which it ought to develop gives rise at the same time to a release of strong effect. And 6, the generating of comic pleasure can be encouraged by any other accompanying circumstance. That's Freud's 6 things. Well, with Freud's 5 proposed conditions of humorous events, it laid the foundation for his release theory of laughter. And while anthropologists, linguists have attempted to theorize humor historically, Freud was one of the earliest of the leading historical figures that attempted to break down the components of humor. And he paved a pathway for other psychologists of his time and for future research. And you might ask, why is that important? Don't we just laugh? We just laugh and we... Yes, but we want to understand what makes us laugh. Why do we laugh? What do we find funny? Why are we sometimes appalled at the things that we find funny? So there's all kinds of more things in this that I want to get back to after the break, because the break is now upon us. And we're going to come back and hit the 4 theories of humor and talk about this a little bit more. So sit tight. We'll be right back. Hey gang, thanks for sitting through that break. Welcome back to the show. This is Scotty Roberts. You're watching and listening to the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. And you can come and join the other Intrepids in the live chat room over on my video stream. That is the simulcast of this show on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. I want to kind of pick up right where we left off because there's so much material I have in front of me here that I fear I shall not cover it. And so we left off and we were talking about we talked about Freud's 6 things, 5 of which he was able to introduce his theory on how humor works. There are 4 theories of humor, and I want to cover these, and we'll try to do it briefly, because when it comes to what's funny or comedic or comedy to us, we sometimes reflect and wonder what made it so funny. Why is that funny? Why is, Seinfeld's funny wine funny to some and not to others, and all the other comics you can think of? Why is sexual humor so funny to people? Is it because we like bawdy nastiness, or is it because everybody can relate to it, and it becomes a funny thing? And so this is the big question, especially when fluke accidents provoke a laughter. Somebody slips on the ice and they do this amazing bit of ballet or trapeze work, and they land on their feet, and we find that funny. Sometimes when they fall, we find it funny. Why does that provoke laughter? It seems ridiculous and even cruel at the time to laugh at the misfortune of other people, but it becomes a joke later. As various psychologists have encountered the same questions, 4 leading theories debunk the motives behind humor and laughter. There's the humor incongruity theory. As the most popular theory, the congruity theory suggests that people laugh at things that surprise them because the context in which it's presented. Things are incongruent or out of place within the context of which they're delivered. This goes along with the idea that jokes are funny because they contradict our expectations for what should happen. But more importantly, with this theory, the incongruity is also between the setup and the punchline. Mommy, what's a delinquent child? Shut up and pass me the crowbar. So, you get the idea. And so, by the way, that wasn't my joke, so I don't take responsibility. If you laughed, it's my joke. If you didn't, it's somebody else's. So, in this example, the setup line prompts us to think that mother's going to be nurturing and educate the innocent child, but the punchline shocks us with a social violation from the mother's incongruous response. Moms are not supposed to encourage and demonstrate appalling behavior for their children, referred to as the incongruity resolution theory. And so the incongruity delivered by the punchline is accompanied by a shocking surprise, consequently making us laugh. Hardy har har, that was funny. Now then there's the humor superiority theory. Another proposed theory is that we laugh at situations that make us feel superior to other people. There's all kinds of examples and all kinds of jokes for this. So according to this theory, we laugh at people who are made to look foolish, and that makes us feel good. It's so good that we laugh. And this theory suggests that when people make a stupid mistake, or are victims of an unfortunate situation, or misunderstand an obvious instruction, they look stupid in a social setting. Thus, we laugh at these jokes and people and situations because it makes us feel superior to the victim and their unfortunate luck. That can be arrogant comedy as well, but that's the humor superiority theory. All right? Makes sense now, doesn't it, by name? So, the tension release theory. While Sigmund Freud is often known for his theory of repression, his idea that we all have aggressive thoughts but we're unable to openly express those things, and psychotherapy practices, he was also a psychologist intrigued by the psychology of humor. According to Freud, he believed that jokes and humor were a way in which people could release their sexual or aggressive thoughts in a socially acceptable way within a society that might not otherwise accept those things socially. So you get that? Humor was used to express sexuality and aggression. Now, Freud proposed that it served as a way to cope with the problems and issues in our lives that we hesitate to confront in any other way. We use humor when we don't want to face something head on. And thus it provides a source of relief for these thoughts unconsciously. And by attempting to cope with the vying and varying emotions and thoughts, laughter is a way to release the tension that was built. And so this theory is a technique used in various movies and plays, and during scenes that include high tension, the plot introduces various comic reliefs, such as a funny side comment from a character. So by doing this, it allows the viewer to release the pent-up emotions created while tension is built, so the viewer can feel relief before the plot builds tension again. And I think of just this morning's show with Rocky in the Situation Room, that Rocky was pissed off by what Facebook did to his accounts. And yet he approached it with, he was angry, but he was using humor to vent that anger. I don't think Rocky has any problems expressing his anger, but to a radio audience, he vented that in a way that helped him cope with it, and you hear the story, which comes along with a lesson about censorship and things like that. So then there's the humor benign violation theory. And while this theory isn't an official amongst the psychological world quite yet, the developing theory has been making headway over recent years. And this is a theory that's a bit of a patchwork theory. It builds on 3 other proposed theories, and it also integrates work of a linguist. And so this theory proposes that this only occurs when 3 specific conditions are satisfied. A situation is a violation. B, the situation is benign. And C, both perceptions occur simultaneously at the same time. So these violations are strictly based on how an individual believes the world should be, thus accounting for a discrepancy between what different people find funny. An example of this is tickling, which naturally produces laughter amongst primates, all primates, human beings, but it's a benign violation because they're harmless attacks, yet have the ability to be physically threatening. And so this theory is also important because it accounts for the thresholds of what is and is not funny. It explains that a situation may not be funny because the violation isn't simultaneously benign, or because it's benign without social violation. So in the example of tickling, laughter ceases when it's too benign, the lack of tickling, or when it becomes too much of a violation, aggressive tickling. We could call that other things, but, we won't. Could you imagine going out on a first date and say, I want to see how you laugh. Let me just tickle you. Come on, let me tickle you. I'm going to grab you right there and tickle you. Could you imagine how that would fly? Probably not very good, unless there's other things attached to that the other person finds very appealing. So similarly, with jokes, the threshold as to whether or not the joke is funny is a really delicate balance of being tamed and crude. All right? So there are styles of humor as well. Believe it or not. Within personality psychology research, 4 humor styles have been honed to reflect how individuals utilize humor in everyday situations. And maybe you can plug yourself into some of these. And it kind of goes like this. The 4 styles are, number 1, affiliative humor. Affiliative. It's affiliation. Let me explain it. Affiliative humor is based on telling jokes that everyone can relate to in hopes of bringing groups of people together through humor. These jokes focus on the humor of everyday life and are most often used by comedians. Through the use of affiliative humor, the goal is to promote happiness, create fellowship. Examples would be like using crazy and exaggerated vocal intonations or facial expressions. Think of Rocky Stucci and Da Face. Or Rocky Stucci talking in falsetto. Like that about something. That is affiliatory types of humor, affiliative humor. Jokes that everyone finds amusement in is also an example. Pardon me. And, I was thinking of this many years ago now. It was, what year would it have been? I graduated high school in 1978, and we had a reunion where I was the MC. And I was married to my now ex-wife in 1989, so 78 to 88. So it wasn't my 10th. I think it was my 15th year reunion, 1984. We did a 15 year. And I went and I was the MC, and I was the sole MC. And we had a small school. I went to a small religious school, and we had 27 seniors that graduated that year in Minneapolis, a big city, small school. And so it was most of those 27 people made it, maybe 20 or more, and their spouses or significant others. And so we had about 50 people, and there were 40 to 50 people in the room. And I knew, because it was a Christian school setting, that I couldn't say a lot, even though I knew a lot of the people and had kept up with a few of them. You could joke any way you wanted to, but we were in the school building. Some of the old teachers were there, religious education, so we had to kind of mind our P's and Q's a bit. But even my wife at the time said afterwards, she said, "I didn't realize what a funny guy you are." Because she had never heard me in a public setting, because what I was trying to do was tell jokes like this affiliative humor that drew us all together. We were thinking of our history and thinking of things that happened and events that took place. So that's affiliative humor. We had self-enhancing humor. Now, this kind of humor, it's based on the ability to laugh at yourself when things go wrong. Finding the humor in unfortunate everyday situations. Rocky and I in the Situation Room, we have a little topical segment we called Scotty Got Yelled At Today. And, that's self-defacing humor. But it's for the reason of bringing comic effect, because they are things we can all relate to. Self-enhancing humor is seen as a way to cope with stress by putting a positive spin on a negative situation. Commentary on unfortunate situations to make it more amusing. Noting daily idiosyncrasies, things like that. Then you have aggressive humor. We all know what that is. Aggressive humor typically is targeted humor that puts down or insults other individuals. This is the kind of humor that's used by bullies, as it aims to emotionally and verbally abuse the target. This is the kind of humor that we refer to as off-color, and has potential to make some audiences feel uncomfortable. That would be insults, racist jokes, targeted put-downs, critical commentary, stuff like that. You can think of the kind of people who would use that kind of humor. Self-defeating humor is another one. Self-defeating humor victimizes and insults the speaker. It captures the audience attention with a poor me approach, which is humorous for the audience, but it's mentally harmful of the speaker. This form of humor is typically seen as the most unhealthy because it dwells on the negative aspects of the self and can lower confidence. While this style of humor gives the speaker a way to laugh at themselves, it usually acknowledges the speaker's low self-confidence, insecurities before the audience is able to even notice it on their own. It'd be like a fat comedian saying, "It doesn't help because I'm so fat. I'm a fat guy. We all know it. And so here's my joke about it, blah, blah, blah." And so or the speaker pointing out their own weaknesses to the audience. That is probably the least effective humor. It's self-defeating humor. You're a defeatist about yourself. So how does humor affect our daily lives? How does it influence disorders that we may have? In many psychological studies, it's been confirmed that laughter, the result of humor, leads to increased heart rates and oxygen consumption. So like aerobic exercise, it's good for you. Humor also increases epinephrine. I can never pronounce these things. Epinephrine and norepinephrine. I gotta imagine epinephrine is one thing and no epinephrine means there's just none of it there. What do we call this, doctor? There's no epinephrine. Oh, good name. So there you go. That's how that came about. Maybe. I have no idea. So it's within the symptomatic nervous system. These chemicals at work. They stabilize our blood pressure, decreasing high blood pressure that's caused by sad emotions. So within the immune system, laughter, as a response to humorous stimuli, increases natural killer cell activity, which prevents viruses and kills cancerous cells, believe it or not. Could you laugh your way to a cure? Maybe. Look at Monsters, Inc. If you're a parent and you watch that movie 300 times like I did, they found that laughter filled the energy canisters faster than screams of terror. So, that was their acknowledgement of this. Excuse me. Humor is a defense mechanism. Nervous laughter is this common response that serves as a defense mechanism. And while many people respond to aggressive humor with nervous laughter, to release their uneasy and uncomfortable emotions, it's been found that this response reduces the suffering of the suffering the laughter experiences, thus a defense mechanism. So nervous laughter is this psychological response that finds humor in serious situations in an attempt to protect the person from having to face an uncomfortable situation or absolutely friggin' break down. So when somebody laughs at a tragic accident, it's like, here we are, we've got to cross this sandy patch that's filled with rattlesnakes. It's like, oh, yeah, right, I'm going to do that. You can think of so many things to say there. So sometimes that's what it's used for, to relieve stress. Or to act as a defense mechanism. Then we use it to relieve stress and humor. We use it to relieve stress. Humor, we use humor to relieve our stress. Those two things can be joined. Anxiety and depression are both examples of stress responses in the body. As laughter lowers blood pressure, it also releases endorphins to counter cortisol and adrenaline, and chemically releasing a sense of joy into the brain. So even smiling causes the brain to release dopamine into the body. That automatically makes us feel better. Dopamine. Bring it on. And so by remaining in a calm state, or laughing to attain a calmer state, the body becomes more stable and rational, creating a more positive mental state. So also within the immune system, the release of the neuropeptides. There you go. I almost stumbled on that, but didn't because it was such an easy word. Neuropeptides. It relieves pain and lessens depression and anxiety. Pardon my cough. Very dry in the house these days, and I'm getting a lot of that. Maybe picking up a little hint of a cold, but I'm not virused up. I got to tell you that. So humor, it's really the art of amusement. Do children really laugh more than adults? Yeah, they do. Do people really lose their sense of funniness with age? Sometimes. Many of them do. But it's not necessary, and it's not necessarily. Because it's refined over development. Children laugh and express themselves in ways that are socially unacceptable for adults. While adults might find the same situations as funny that children do, adults simply know when it's not, and when it is, and when it isn't acceptable to laugh. And there are 5 main ideas. 1, laughter is a universal communication tool that translates humorous situations across various age groups, cultures, and demographics. 2, laughter can act as, or good humor can act as a defense mechanism for thoughts and feelings that create tension and seek relief. That's that tension release theory. You know, there are lots of things that could fall under the category of tension relief theory. I got some good ideas, but the mention of them might be an appropriate comedy for some people in this group. So there you go. So 3, it acts as a way to cope with stress, to alleviate negative feelings and alleviate cognitive dissonance, which we see a hell of a lot going on today in our political world. 4, it's built off of our ability to understand our social situations, to pick up on nuance, apply intellect to our daily lives so we can indulge in the subtle and egregious application of humor. And 5, it acts as a way to maintain happiness by creating situations that make us feel good and better about ourselves. So, you know what? Finding that humor has nuance that affects our psyches, that is psychological. There's an understanding to the psychology of humor. Why it works, why it shouldn't work, when it works, why it's there. And I think understanding some of these things are really essential in our lives. Do you know anybody who tells jokes and is very inappropriate about it? When and where and how? Might be good for them to know some of these things. It's good for any of us who work to entertain people, either through information education, like Rocky and I try to do, the professor tries to do, and it's good for us to find out what makes people laugh, what draws people in. It's good to know how this all works. And now we've only got a few minutes left, but I wanted to hit. My nose is starting to get stuffy too, as I've coughed now 3 or 4 times in this show. And this is the program that does not have a mute button on it, nor does so pardon me for when you hear my coughing. But I'm getting stuffy, too. So I don't know if any of that is, burgeoning allergies starting to build up all the time this time of year. This is getting warm outside. Not warm today. It's back down into the 30s today. But it's going to be pushing 70 over the next few days. So that's a good thing. But it's been nice, and so I think I'm picking some of that up. Anyway. Moving on, there are 5, maybe this is a good way to wrap up this whole thing and do it in just about 3 minutes. There's 5 ways that humor reduces our stress and our anxiety. And stress anxiety, it's that feeling when your heart clenches up, butterflies dance in your belly, your breathing constricts. We've all felt these feelings, and we've probably at some point struggled to reduce stress and anxiety from our lives by practicing meditation or popping pills or smoking some weed. But there are other mechanisms that can reduce stress and anxiety. A natural and effective way that taps into the body-mind's most amazing powers of self-healing. It's humor. Humor is a self-healing tool. Now, here are 5 ways, and we'll cover them as quickly as we can without going too in-depth. Humor distracts. Stress and anxiety are internally focused phenomena. And how something's going to affect you, how will you deal with something, whether you made the right choice. Humor is a great way of distracting you from yourself. So for a time, your attention's diverted to the larger joke at hand, or focused on the comedy that's happening to somebody else. It's a way to cope with anxiety. Humor relaxes us. Stress and anxiety not only permeate your mind, but they have a physical manifestation within your body. Muscles tense, we get ulcers, we poop more. Well, all of that stuff happens. And so, or we hold back our poop, not against our will. All of these things can happen. And so humor relaxes us. And it in turn relaxes the body's muscles, calms the sympathetic nervous system from the adrenalized fight or flight response. So, if a T-Rex is chasing primordial man through the jungle, you could relieve the stress of that by telling a joke. Maybe. So humor reframes things. Humor is a way of making us all view things in a different light. Perhaps humor uses a little of self-deprecating angle or tosses in some biting satire or sarcasm to get a good laugh. Maybe it's simply over-the-top slapstick. But humor reauthorizes or changes the perspective on your issues and can make stress and anxiety melt away. Especially as you realize your issues aren't as insurmountable after all. Then there's humor as pharmacology. Ooh, I saw some people out there. Ooh, pharmacology? They perked up. Humor brings about a chemical reaction that is as powerful antithesis to stress and anxiety. Laughter releases certain feel-good chemicals, which we just talked about a few minutes ago, which are the equivalent of nature's antidepressants. On a contrasting level, laughter has also been linked with a reduction in the stress hormone cortisol. So on a neuromolecular level, humor can act as a powerful panacea to stress and anxiety. And then the final one, and then we got to be out. Folks, humor heals us. Getting together, having a laugh is a good medicine. Humor has been found to increase communication, to heal rifts between people, to mend disputes. If your stress and your anxiety are caused by strife between friends, family, the guy living 2 doors down, or a worldwide pandemic that has us all sequestered in our houses, if this has happened, try having a laugh together. And see, we can do this. We can do this online. We can meet like we never have before without ever coming in contact with anybody. So once again, some self-deprecation, a laugh at your own expense, might soften a thorny issue. Some self-deprecation and a laugh at your own expense. And so the next time stress and anxiety have you cornered, if you're feeling any of that now, being self-isolated, lean over to grab that bottle of Pinot Noir and you try flicking on YouTube and having a laugh instead. Watch something. Listen to this show, the Situation Room. Talk to your friends online. Humor will heal us. So there you go, folks. Gotta go because we're right at the end of the show. Thank you for being here. I'll be back on Sunday morning with It's Sunday, and might even make a few surprise appearances with Rocky over the weekend. So stay tuned. Other than that, we'll see you back here Monday night. Have a good weekend.